I left quietly, then sent the groom's company board. The file revealed, I am the CEO.
The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets outside the towering, frost-kissed windows of my parents' sprawling Connecticut estate. But inside, the air was suffocatingly warm and thick with the scent of roasted duck, mulled wine, and unfiltered arrogance. This was not a home. It was a stage. Every inch of the massive, open-concept dining room had been meticulously curated by my mother, Evelyn, to project an image of untouchable, aristocratic perfection. A roaring fire crackled in the colossal stone hearth, casting a golden, flickering glow across the room. At the center of it all sat the dining table, an obscene 20-foot slab of polished mahogany imported from Italy. It was dressed to the nines, glittering with 24-karat gold-rimmed china, impossibly fragile crystal goblets that caught the firelight like diamonds, and a sprawling, intricate centerpiece of winter roses, frosted pine cones, and burning taper candles. It looked like a spread straight out of a high-end architectural digest, which was exactly the point. My mother had hired a professional photographer to capture the perfect family Christmas for her country club's elite newsletter and her meticulously manicured social media presence. I stood in the arched doorway of the dining room, brushing the melting snow from the shoulders of my modest, charcoal gray wool coat. I was 28 years old, yet standing in this house always made me feel like I was a trespassing stray dog who had accidentally wandered into a palace. As I stepped onto the pristine, heated marble floor, the joyous, echoing laughter in the room abruptly died. My mother, draped in a bespoke emerald green silk gown and dripping in pearls, stopped mid-sentence. She turned her icy blue eyes toward me, her perfectly drawn lips thinning into a hard, disappointed line. Beside her stood my father, Richard, swirling a glass of expensive scotch, who simply sighed and looked away as if my mere existence was a profound inconvenience. But the real stars of the evening were seated at the head of the table. My younger sister, Chloe, the undisputed golden child, and her fiancé, Julian. Julian was the hotshot, arrogant CEO of an emerging tech logistics empire, a man whose ego entered the room 5 minutes before he did. They were getting married in 3 weeks, and tonight was essentially a pre-wedding coronation. Chloe, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, giggled and leaned into Julian's shoulder, both of them staring at me with expressions of barely concealed pity and amusement. "Elena," my mother said, her voice cutting through the silence like a freshly sharpened scalpel. "You're late." "The roads were icing over, Mom," I replied evenly, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. I stepped forward, carrying a beautifully wrapped gift, a rare first edition book from my father that had taken me months to track down. "I'm here now. Where should I sit?" My mother's gaze flicked down to the meticulously arranged table. She didn't even try to hide her disdain. She slowly lifted a perfectly manicured hand and gestured to the sprawling spread. "You aren't sitting, Elena," she said, her tone dripping with casual cruelty. "We didn't set a plate for you." I froze. I looked at the table. There were exactly 12 chairs, 12 pristine place settings, 12 crystal goblets. Every single seat was accounted for. My extended family, Chloe's future in-laws, even Julian's pompous business partner, everyone had a place. Everyone except me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady, though a deep, familiar ache bloomed in my chest. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't make this difficult," my mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "The photographer is arriving in 20 minutes. The table is perfectly symmetrical. Your look doesn't fit the aesthetic we are going for. We can't have you sitting there looking completely out of place and ruining the family photos. Julian's parents are here, Elena. We need to present a flawless, united front. You understand, don't you? You can eat in the kitchen with the catering staff after the photo shoot is over. Just stay out of sight. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking snort of laughter. Julian leaned back in his plush velvet chair, a cruel, predatory smirk playing on his lips. Come on, Elena, Julian drawled, his voice echoing with arrogant superiority. Don't ruin the vibe. Go grab a roll from the kitchen and let the adults handle the optics. For a decade, this was the exact moment where I would have crumbled. The old Elena would have felt the hot sting of tears welling in her eyes. The old Elena would have bowed her head, apologized for breathing their air, and scurried into the kitchen to eat cold scraps while listening to the laughter of the family that despised her. The old Elena would have begged for a scrap of their love, but the old Elena was dead. I looked at my mother's smug face. I looked at my father's cowardly silence. I looked at Chloe's vicious smile. And finally, I locked eyes with Julian, the arrogant billionaire groom who thought he was untouchable. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw a tantrum. Instead, a slow, icy, and deeply terrifying smile spread across my face. You're absolutely right, Mother, I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. I wouldn't want to ruin the picture-perfect aesthetic. Enjoy your evening. Without breaking eye contact with Julian, I slowly turned around. I walked back out the heavy oak front doors and stepped into the freezing, swirling snow. I didn't look back as I got into my car. They thought they had just banished the pathetic, quiet scapegoat to the shadows. They thought they had won. What my smug, status-obsessed family didn't know was that for the last 6 months, I had been conducting an independent, highly classified forensic audit on Julian's tech logistics empire. What they didn't know was that Julian wasn't a brilliant CEO. He was a desperate fraud who had embezzled millions to fund his and Chloe's lavish lifestyle. And what they absolutely didn't know was that sitting on the passenger seat of my car was a thick, encrypted hard drive containing irrefutable proof of his crimes. A drive that I was about to overnight directly to the chairman of Julian's board of directors, the SEC, and the FBI. I put the car in drive, the tires crunching against the fresh snow. By the time they finished eating their perfect Christmas duck, their entire world would be on the brink of total, catastrophic annihilation. Before I tell you exactly how that encrypted hard drive systematically dismantled Julian's fraudulent billionaire empire, and before I describe the absolute multi-million-dollar chaos that descended upon my mother's picture-perfect Connecticut Christmas, I need to pause the story right here. I want to step out of the freezing snow, step out of that idling car and talk directly to you. Yes, you. The person sitting behind the screen right now, listening to my voice. My name is Elena, and if you are listening to this, chances are you know exactly how heavy that front door felt when I walked out of it. You know the exact, suffocating weight of the air in a room where you are merely tolerated, not loved. Society has this incredibly toxic obsession with the phrase, blood is thicker than water. We are force-fed this narrative from the moment we are born, through television, holiday movies, and unsolicited advice from people who have never lived a day in our shoes. They tell us that family is everything. They tell us that you have to forgive, forget, and continuously show up to the dinner table, no matter how many times the people sitting across from you slide a knife under your ribs. They tell us that because someone shares your DNA, they are permanently entitled to a front row seat in your life, your wallet, and your emotional well-being. But let me tell you the darkest, most liberating truth I have ever learned. Blood does not equal a blank check for abuse. DNA is a biological accident. It is not a lifetime contract for disrespect. For years, I was the designated punching bag for a family that cared more about how they looked to their country club friends than how they treated their own daughter. I know the profound, isolated agony of the holidays. I know the anxiety that starts building in your chest in late November, knowing you are about to walk into a house where your achievements will be minimized, your appearance will be criticized, and your boundaries will be bulldozed. All while someone snaps a photo for Instagram with the caption, "Blessed." I know what it's like to sit in your car in the driveway for 20 minutes before walking inside, practicing your breathing, building a mental fortress, and promising yourself that this time you won't let them make you cry. I know the feeling of being the reliable workhorse, the one who is expected to be invisible until you are needed to fix a problem, fund a lifestyle, or take the blame for the golden child's mistakes. When you are the family scapegoat, they don't just steal your peace. They systematically try to dismantle your reality. They gaslight you into believing that your reactions to their toxicity are the actual problem. They label you overly sensitive, dramatic, or difficult, simply because you refuse to quietly absorb their poison anymore. They want you weak. They want you dependent. Because a strong, independent, self-aware version of you is the greatest threat to their carefully constructed illusion. But there is a specific, magical moment in every survivor's life. A moment I just experienced in that grand dining room. It's the moment the switch finally flips. The moment the tears dry up forever, replaced by an absolute icy clarity. It is the realization that you are not trapped. You are the one holding the keys to the door. You are the one driving the car. And the only thing keeping you at a table where they refuse to set a plate for you is you. Walking away from toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate, profound act of self-preservation. It is looking in the mirror and deciding that your mental health, your financial security, and your fundamental human dignity are worth more than a fake smile in a forced family photograph. It is the realization that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. You cannot save people who are actively trying to drown you to keep themselves afloat. Before we get back into the story, and I reveal the devastating revenge that permanently shattered my family's facade, I want to hear from you. I want you to go down into the comment section right now and tell me exactly where you are watching this video from. What city, what state, what country are you tuning in from? Let's show the world how vast this community of survivors truly is. If you have ever had to stare down a toxic family member, if you have ever had to quietly pack your bags and walk away to protect your peace, or if you have ever had to deliver a brutal, undeniable lesson to the people who completely underestimated your worth, I need you to hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We are building an empire here, a community of strong, independent, self-made individuals who refuse to play the victim, who demand respect, and who know that the ultimate revenge is massive, unstoppable success. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story, and share your own experiences in the comments below, because your story might be the exact spark someone else needs today to finally stand up, push back their chair, and walk out the door. Now, let's get back to the snow, the hard drive, and the complete, utter destruction of Julian's billion-dollar lie. The heater in my Audi hummed a steady, quiet rhythm, working overtime to combat the bitter Connecticut freeze pressing against the windshield. As the massive wrought iron gates of my parents' estate shrunk in my rearview mirror, fading into the swirling white blizzard, my heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, An overwhelming, intoxicating wave of absolute tranquility washed over me. To truly understand how a mother could look her own flesh and blood in the eye and casually refuse her a seat at a Christmas dinner just to preserve a photograph's aesthetic, you have to understand the deeply warped, meticulously calculated psychological prison that was the Harrington household. Growing up, our house wasn't a home. It was a high-stakes, ruthless corporate theater. And my mother, Evelyn, was the tyrannical director. She was a woman who practically worshipped at the altar of high society. Her entire existence was defined by country club memberships, charity gala seating charts, and maintaining the illusion of generational wealth. To the outside world, the Harringtons were the epitome of New England aristocracy. My father, Richard, was a senior partner at a mid-tier law firm, a man whose cowardly, spineless nature was perfectly masked by expensive tailored suits, imported cigars, and a perpetual, brooding silence. He enabled my mother's toxicity not by participating, but by simply turning his back, pouring a glass of Macallan, and pretending he didn't hear the emotional slaughter happening in the next room. And then there was Chloe. Chloe was the undeniable, undisputed golden child. Born 4 years after me, she was the blue-eyed, golden-haired miracle that my mother had always wanted, a living, breathing accessory to parade around the country club. From the moment she could walk, Chloe was treated like a fragile, priceless artifact. Her childhood bedroom was a sprawling, custom-designed suite that looked like it belonged in a royal palace, complete with a walk-in closet overflowing with designer dresses she wore exactly once. She was given private equestrian lessons, elite ballet coaching, and a shiny, brand-new Range Rover the very morning of her 16th birthday. I, on the other hand, was the dark-haired, quiet mistake. I was the family's designated workhorse, the scapegoat, the unseen ghost who was only acknowledged when there was a problem to be solved or a mess to be cleaned up. While Chloe was away at luxury summer camps in Switzerland, I was working double shifts at a local diner to pay for my own high school textbooks and standardized testing fees. My bedroom was a small, poorly insulated guest room at the back of the house, furnished with outdated hand-me-downs. Whenever I achieved something monumental, straight A's, a full-ride academic scholarship to a prestigious university, a grueling summer internship at a top-tier financial firm, my mother would immediately minimize it. "Oh, that's nice, Elena." She would wave me off, her eyes fixed on her iPad. "But did you see Chloe made the varsity cheer squad? Let's not overshadow your sister's special week." The dynamic was clear. Chloe was meant to be admired. I was meant to be utilized. This toxic parasitism escalated to horrifying new heights when I graduated with my master's degree in forensic accounting and immediately landed a high six-figure job in the city. Suddenly, I wasn't just the quiet, invisible sister anymore. I had become the family's unofficial, unauthorized ATM. My parents had spent decades living drastically beyond their means to keep up the Harrington facade, and the financial walls were finally closing in. But instead of cutting back on their lavish lifestyle, they turned to me. It started with manipulative, tear-filled phone calls from my mother. She would claim my father's firm was struggling, that they were going to lose the estate, that the stress was going to give him a heart attack. She weaponized my deeply ingrained guilt, demanding I contribute to the family that raised me. So, like a fool, I paid. I covered their property taxes. I paid off my mother's secret maxed-out platinum credit cards. I transferred thousands of dollars to keep them afloat. But the final, brutal awakening happened 3 years ago. I had just transferred $25,000 of my hard-earned annual bonus to my parents, believing I was saving my childhood home from foreclosure. 2 days later, I logged onto social media and saw Chloe, who had dropped out of 3 different expensive liberal arts colleges and refused to get a job, posting photos from a first-class flight to Dubai. The caption read, "When mommy and daddy surprise you with a luxury month-long getaway. #blessed. #richgirlsummer." They hadn't used my money to save the house. They had used the blood, sweat, and tears of the daughter they despised to fund the lavish delusions of the daughter they worshipped. That was the exact day the old Elena died. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply logged into my banking portal, canceled every single recurring transfer, blocked their accounts, and officially cut them off. The fallout was apocalyptic. My mother called me a selfish, ungrateful monster. She told her entire social circle that I was a bitter, jealous failure who had turned my back on my family. I was unofficially excommunicated, invited to family events only so my mother could maintain the optical illusion of a happy family for her country club friends, while actively treating me like a leper the moment the cameras were off. Which brings us to Julian. When Chloe introduced Julian Sterling to the family a year ago, my parents practically salivated. He was a smooth-talking, impossibly arrogant tech logistics visionary who wore $50,000 watches, drove a fleet of leased exotic cars, and threw around corporate buzzwords like a Silicon Valley prophet. My mother thought she had finally hit the ultimate jackpot, a billionaire son-in-law to permanently cement the Harrington legacy and fund her exorbitant lifestyle forever. Julian soaked up their pathetic groveling, treating my parents like his personal fan club and treating me like the help. But they all made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. They forgot what I actually do for a living. I am a senior forensic auditor for one of the most ruthless private intelligence and financial security firms on the Eastern Seaboard. I spend my days dismantling complex corporate frauds, hunting down shell companies, and destroying white-collar criminals who think they are smarter than the system. The very first night I met Julian at a family dinner, he spent 2 hours bragging about his proprietary logistics algorithm and his massive offshore investment rounds. My parents were mesmerized. But I noticed that his custom suit was poorly tailored, a hallmark of someone trying to look rich rather than someone who actually is. I noticed that his impossibly expensive Patek Philippe watch had a microscopic flaw on the bezel. It was a high-end black market replica. And when a real billionaire doesn't get defensive over a tax question from an accountant, a fraud does. So I went to work, quietly, invisibly. For 6 months, while Chloe planned her $1 million wedding and my mother bragged to anyone who would listen about her future billionaire son-in-law, I meticulously tore Julian's empire apart from the shadows. I tracked his shell companies to the Cayman Islands. I found the massive, gaping holes in his non-existent tech platform. I traced the millions of dollars he had illegally embezzled from his own early-stage investors, money he was using to lease the cars, buy Chloe's massive diamond ring, and fund the fake, glittering lifestyle my family was so desperately clinging to. Julian wasn't a billionaire. He was a highly leveraged, desperate con artist running a high-stakes Ponzi scheme, and the walls were violently caving in on him. He was using his upcoming marriage to Chloe and my father's supposed respectable legal connections as a shield to secure one final, massive round of fraudulent funding before skipping the country. As I drove through the snow, away from the house where I had just been denied a plate, I reached over and tapped the hard drive with my index finger. The pathetic, quiet scapegoat hadn't just walked away. She had walked away holding the detonator to their entire universe. I sat in the driver's seat of my Audi for exactly 3 minutes. The heavy, rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers aggressively pushing the accumulating snow away was the only sound inside the insulated cabin. I looked at the sleek, matte black encrypted hard drive resting on the leather passenger seat. It was a loaded weapon, packed with enough undeniable forensic ammunition to completely obliterate the entire Harrington family delusion. My original plan had been clinical, safe, and distant. I was going to drive back to the city, drop the drive in a secure courier pouch, and let the federal authorities slowly dismantle Julian's fraudulent life over the next few months. I was going to let my family find out through a chaotic morning news broadcast or a sudden aggressive raid by the FBI. But as I looked back through the blizzard at the glowing, massive arched windows of the estate, a different feeling washed over me. I could see the silhouettes of my family inside, laughing, posing, and raising their crystal goblets. I could see the flash of the country club photographer's camera illuminating the dining room in sharp, brilliant bursts. They were celebrating my banishment. They were toasting to the fact that they had successfully excised the pathetic daughter from their perfect, symmetrical aesthetic. A cold, absolute clarity settled into my bones. Why should I let them enjoy one last luxurious meal in peace? Why should I allow them to sleep soundly in their bespoke silk sheets tonight, dreaming of a billionaire future that didn't exist? They had demanded a perfect, unforgettable family memory. It was time to give them one. I didn't reach for the gear shift. Instead, I reached for the heavy, reinforced titanium briefcase in the back seat. Inside was my primary work terminal, a state-of-the-art, fully encrypted laptop with direct, unrestricted backdoor access to the global financial servers of my firm. I unlatched the briefcase, pulled out the sleek silver machine, and tucked it under my arm. I grabbed the hard drive, slipped it into the deep pocket of my charcoal gray wool coat, and pushed my car door open against the howling winter wind. The walk back up the long, sweeping, snow-covered driveway felt different this time. I wasn't the terrified, anxious scapegoat bracing herself for a night of emotional abuse. I was the executioner, walking up to the gallows. I didn't bother knocking. I grabbed the heavy, ornate brass handles of the double oak front doors and pushed them open with a forceful, resounding crack that echoed through the massive foyer. The freezing winter wind whipped into the house behind me, swirling snow across the pristine, heated marble floors and instantly dropping the temperature in the room. The joyous, booming laughter in the dining room stopped instantly. The flash of the photographer's camera froze. I walked slowly into the archway of the dining room. The scene was exactly as I had left it, only now, the family was clustered together at the head of the 20-foot mahogany table, posing behind Julian and Chloe. The photographer, a nervous-looking man holding a painfully expensive DSLR camera, lowered his lens and stared at me. My mother's face instantly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The emerald green silk of her bespoke gown rustled as she took a sharp step forward, her manicured hands curling into tight fists. "Elena!" she hissed, her voice vibrating with a panicked, venomous urgency. She darted her eyes toward Julian's wealthy parents, desperate to keep the illusion intact. "What on earth is the matter with you? I gave you explicit instructions to stay in the kitchen out of sight. You are letting the freezing air into the house, and you are ruining the photo shoot. Go back to the back of the house right this instant." My father, Richard, let out a loud, theatrical sigh, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "For God's sake, Elena, stop being so dramatically difficult. Do you always have to make everything about you? Have a shred of respect for your sister's special night." Chloe rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. She leaned heavily against Julian, pouting her lips. "She's just jealous, Mom. She's 28, single, and pushing papers in a cubicle. Just ignore her. Let's take the picture." I didn't say a single word to my mother. I didn't acknowledge my father's pathetic reprimand. I didn't even look at Chloe. My eyes were locked dead onto Julian. Julian, sitting at the head of the table like a smug, untouchable king, offered me a lazy, arrogant smirk. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his poorly tailored $5,000 tuxedo jacket. "Did you forget your little doggy bag of dinner rolls, Elena?" Julian drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. The sycophantic guests around the table chuckled nervously, eager to appease the supposed billionaire in the room. "Or did you come back to beg for a small loan? Because I told you last time I don't invest in low-yield assets." I walked forward. My footsteps were slow, deliberate, and heavy against the marble. I didn't stop until I was standing exactly opposite him, at the other end of the colossal table. I placed my titanium laptop down on the polished mahogany, right on top of a perfectly arranged centerpiece of frosted winter roses. "I didn't come back for dinner, Julian," I said, my voice echoing through the silent, cavernous room. It was completely calm, unshakable. I opened the laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the dim, firelit room. "I came back to deliver an audit." Julian let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "An audit? What are you talking about? You're a mid-level bookkeeper, Elena. Don't embarrass yourself in front of my board members." He gestured lazily to the two pompous men in bespoke suits sitting to his right. "Actually," I replied softly, my fingers dancing across the illuminated keyboard with practiced, lethal precision. "I am not a mid-level bookkeeper. That's just what I let my mother tell her country club friends because the truth is far too complex for her to comprehend. I am the senior managing partner of Vanguard Financial Intelligence. We specialize in dismantling multinational corporate fraud." The arrogant smirk on Julian's face flickered, just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. I hit a final keystroke, effortlessly hacking into the estate's network and instantly hijacking the massive 70-inch flat-screen television mounted above the stone fireplace. The screen blinked black, and then suddenly illuminated the room with a brilliant, blinding white light. Displayed on the massive screen in bold, undeniable high definition were the highly classified internal financial records of Sterling Logistics, Julian's supposed billion-dollar tech empire. "What the hell is this?" Julian barked, sitting up straight. The lazy arrogance vanished from his posture, replaced by a sudden, rigid tension. "Turn that off! That is proprietary corporate data. You are violating federal law." "No, Julian," I corrected him, my voice remaining eerily soothing as I pulled the encrypted hard drive from my pocket and placed it beside the laptop. "Proprietary corporate data implies you actually have a legitimate corporation. What I have displayed on this screen is a masterclass in securities fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny." The dining room descended into a horrifying, breathless silence. The photographer slowly backed away against the wall. Julian's parents stopped breathing. My mother's jaw dropped, her perfectly painted lips parting in absolute shock. "Let's walk the family through the numbers, shall we?" I continued, stepping to the side so everyone had a perfect, unobstructed view of the television. I tapped a key, and a complex web of offshore transactions filled the screen. "You claim to have an automated AI-driven logistics platform, but you don't. Your proprietary software is just a heavily modified open-source spreadsheet program. You have no actual clients. Your revenue stream is entirely fabricated." "Shut your mouth!" Julian roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The crystal goblets rattled violently. A dark, ugly shade of crimson began to creep up his neck. "Richard, control your lunatic daughter. I'll sue her into the ground." My father stood up, his face pale and sweating. "Elena, what is the meaning of this? Turn that television off right now. You are humiliating this family." "I haven't even gotten to the humiliating part yet, Dad," I replied coldly, never taking my eyes off Julian. I tapped another key. The screen shifted to a series of heavily redacted bank transfers originating from the Cayman Islands. For the last 2 years, Julian has been running a classic, highly leveraged Ponzi scheme. He takes money from Series A investors, funnels it through 3 separate shell companies in the Caymans to make it look like organic revenue, and uses that money to pay off the interest on his massive, crippling personal debts. Chloe suddenly shoved her chair back. Her face was chalk white, her eyes darting between me and the television screen. Julian, what is she talking about? Tell her to stop lying! Julian was hyperventilating now. The facade was cracking, splintering, and rapidly disintegrating in real time. She's insane! She faked those documents! She's a jealous, psychotic bitch! Am I? I asked softly. I tapped one final key. The screen displayed a very specific, undeniable, itemized receipt from a high-end jeweler in Dubai. 3 months ago, Julian purchased a 6-carat flawless diamond engagement ring for my sister. He paid exactly $450,000 for it. Chloe gasped, instinctively bringing her left hand to her chest, protecting the massive, glittering stone on her finger. My mother let out a small, breathless sound of validation, as if the price tag of the ring somehow proved Julian's wealth. "What you don't know," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the entire room, "is that the money used to buy that ring was directly embezzled from the employee pension fund of a small, family-owned shipping company that Julian aggressively acquired and bankrupted last year. You are wearing stolen retirement funds on your finger, Chloe." Chloe let out a high-pitched, horrified shriek and dropped her hand as if the ring had suddenly caught fire. "That's enough!" Julian bellowed, his voice cracking with a terrifying primal panic. He lunged across the table, knocking over a crystal pitcher of water, desperate to reach my laptop. But I didn't flinch. I simply pressed the enter key. "You're too late, Julian," I said smoothly as a loading bar appeared on the massive screen. "Sending encrypted packet. Remember how you said you didn't invest in low-yield assets? Well, my firm does. When I discovered your massive web of fraud, I didn't just audit you. I used my personal capital to completely buy out the shadow lending firm that holds all of your heavily leveraged debt." The loading bar reached 100%. Transfer complete. I looked Julian dead in the eye, watching the sheer, unadulterated terror consume his arrogant soul. "I am your biggest creditor, Julian. I literally own you. And as of 10 seconds ago, I just triggered the breach of contract clause on all of your loans. I froze your corporate accounts, I locked your personal assets, and I sent this entire encrypted file directly to the SEC, the FBI Financial Crimes Division, and the chairman of your board of directors." Julian froze. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his plush velvet chair, his chest heaving, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. I slowly closed my laptop with a definitive, echoing snap. The power in the room had entirely flipped. The fake billionaire was ruined. The golden child was engaged to a federal criminal. The aristocratic parents were publicly exposed as desperate enablers, and the scapegoat they had banished to the snow was standing at the head of the table, holding the ashes of their fake empire in the palm of her hand. For what felt like an absolute eternity, the only sound inside that cavernous, meticulously decorated dining room was the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the antique mahogany grandfather clock in the corner, and the ragged, shallow wheezing coming from Julian's chest. The air, which had previously been thick with the warm scent of roasted duck and the sickening sweetness of unearned arrogance, suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. It was as if the room itself had flatlined. I stood at the foot of the 20-foot dining table, my hands resting lightly on the cool, polished titanium of my closed laptop. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just watched. I watched as the absolute, crushing weight of reality descended upon a room full of people who had spent their entire lives running from it. The silence was violently shattered by a sound so sharp and sudden it made my mother physically jump. A high-pitched, frantic ringing. It was Julian's phone. It was sitting on the table next to his crystal goblet, vibrating so aggressively against the wood that it threatened to rattle the silverware onto the floor. The caller ID flashed brightly. C-O-O, urgent. Julian stared at the glowing screen as if it were a live grenade. His hands, which had been so steady and confident when he was mocking my salary 10 minutes ago, were trembling violently. He didn't reach for it. He couldn't. "Answer it, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, smooth and cold as a razor blade. "Your chief operating officer is probably wondering why the federal authorities just breached your corporate firewall and seized your operating accounts. It's rude to let it go to voicemail." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. With shaking, clammy fingers, he finally picked up the device and swiped the screen, pressing it to his ear. He didn't even have a chance to say hello. The voice on the other end was screaming so loudly, with such unhinged primal panic, that the audio bled clearly into the silent dining room. "Julian, where the hell are you?" The voice shrieked, laced with pure terror. "The servers are locked. Everything is frozen. The bank just called. They said our primary collateral loan went into immediate critical default. Julian, there are 3 black SUVs from the SEC pulling into the underground parking garage right now. What did you do? What the F did you do?" The phone slipped from Julian's numb fingers, clattering loudly onto the Italian china plate in front of him. He stared blankly ahead, his skin taking on a sickening, ashen gray hue. The illusion was dead. The billionaire tech visionary was gone, replaced by a terrified little boy realizing the adults had finally caught him stealing. "Oh my God," whispered Julian's father, a pompous, silver-haired man who had spent the entire evening boasting about his golf handicap. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor. He looked at his son, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and sudden, dawning comprehension. "Julian, the Series B bridge loan, the one you asked me to secure with the collateral from my personal equity firm. Tell me that money is safe. Julian, look at me. Tell me my money is safe." Julian couldn't speak. He just slowly shook his head, tears beginning to well in his panicked eyes. His mother let out a loud, theatrical sob, clutching her pearls. "You arrogant fool! You've ruined us! You've ruined your own father!" Suddenly, my sister Chloe erupted. The golden child, completely unable to process a reality where she wasn't the pampered center of the universe, slammed her hands on the table. Her face was flushed, her perfect, expensive makeup beginning to streak. No, this is a mistake! Julian is a billionaire!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceilings. She turned her venomous gaze toward me, pointing a shaking finger. "You did this! You jealous, pathetic, bitter bitch! You fabricated all of this because you couldn't stand seeing me get everything you ever wanted. You ruined my wedding." "Your wedding?" I asked calmly, raising a single eyebrow. I slowly walked down the length of the table, my footsteps echoing methodically against the marble, until I was standing just a few feet away from her. "You don't have a wedding, Chloe. The venue you booked? The florist? The custom designer gown? It was all paid for with a corporate credit card tied directly to Julian's fraudulent shell company. As of exactly 3 minutes ago, that card was permanently declined. The venue will cancel your reservation by morning. Your wedding doesn't exist, just like the man you are engaged to." "Shut up! Shut up!" Chloe screamed, covering her ears like a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum. She looked desperately at my mother. "Mom, do something! Tell her to fix it!" My mother, Evelyn, finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. The woman who had built her entire identity on social standing realized that her empire was currently burning to the ground in her own dining room. The country club would find out. The elite newsletter would feature a federal indictment instead of a pristine Christmas portrait. Her worst nightmare was unfolding in high definition. Evelyn practically lunged across the space, stepping over the spilled water from Julian's earlier outburst. She grabbed my arm, her impeccably manicured nails digging painfully into the thick wool of my coat. Her eyes were wide, manic, and desperate. "Elena, listen to me," she breathed, her voice dropping to a frantic, pleading whisper. The icy, commanding matriarch was entirely gone. "You've made your point, okay? You proved you were smart. We see it now. But you need to log back onto that computer right this instant. You need to undo whatever you just did. Call your firm. Tell them it was a mistake. Stop the transfer." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. Then, I slowly shifted my gaze to her desperate, terrified face. "Undo it?" I asked softly. "Yes! Think about the family, Elena!" she pleaded, tears genuinely welling in her eyes, not for me, not for the law, but for her precious social standing. "If Julian goes down, we go down. Your father co-signed the lease on his new corporate office. We vouched for him at the country club. If this gets out, we will be completely humiliated. We'll be ruined. You cannot do this to your own family." A deep, resonant laugh bubbled up from the bottom of my chest. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was dark, cold, and entirely devoid of mercy. I forcefully ripped my arm out of her grasp. She stumbled backward, shocked by the physical rejection. "My family?" I echoed, my voice suddenly booming through the room, shaking the crystal in the cabinets. "Where was my family an hour ago, Evelyn? Where was my family when I walked through that front door, freezing and exhausted, only to be told that I was too pathetic to even warrant a plate at the table? Where was my family when I was paying your property taxes while you funded Chloe's luxury vacations?" My mother flinched, opening her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her an inch. "You don't get to invoke the word family only when the bill comes due," I snapped, taking a step toward her, forcing her to retreat. "You didn't want me in the photos because I didn't fit your flawless aesthetic. Well, congratulations, Mother. Look around. The aesthetic is perfectly intact. Every single person sitting at this table is a fraud. You belong together." Before she could respond, an entirely new sound cut through the tension. It was a low, heavy, mechanical rumble coming from outside. The massive bay windows overlooking the front of the estate suddenly illuminated with the sweeping, brilliant flash of rotating yellow strobe lights. My father, who had been completely silent and paralyzed up until this point, rushed to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtains. He let out a strangled gasp. "Good God," he whispered, his face pressing against the frost-kissed glass. I didn't need to look. I knew exactly what was out there. When you trigger an immediate breach of contract on a massive, high-risk corporate loan, the private equity firm doesn't just freeze the bank accounts. They immediately move to secure all physical collateral to prevent the debtor from liquidating it. And because I was the senior managing partner who authorized the hostile takeover of Julian's debt, I had personally expedited the asset recovery protocol. 3 massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow trucks, escorted by 2 black SUVs belonging to my firm's private security contractors, were idling in my parents' snowy circular driveway. Julian, moving like a reanimated corpse, stumbled toward the window. He looked out at the flashing yellow lights illuminating the swirling snow. "My cars," Julian choked out, a fresh wave of tears spilling down his cheeks. My cars, parked proudly in the front of the house for all the guests to admire, were Julian's prized possessions. A custom matte black Lamborghini Aventador and a pristine white Rolls-Royce Cullinan. He had spent the entire evening bragging about how he bought them in cash. The truth, which I had exposed on the spreadsheet, was that they were aggressively leased under his fake corporation's name, used as direct collateral against the loans he couldn't pay. We all watched in agonizing silence as a team of men in dark, weatherproof jackets stepped out of the SUVs. They didn't knock. They didn't ask for permission. They moved with absolute, ruthless efficiency. One man approached the Lamborghini with an electronic bypass tool, popping the locks and disabling the alarm in seconds. The heavy chains of the flatbed began to unspool, clanking loudly against the metal ramp.
No! Julian screamed, finally breaking out of his paralysis. He bolted for the front door, throwing it open and rushing out into the freezing blizzard in his expensive tuxedo. Stop! What are you doing? Those are mine! You can't take those! One of the security contractors, a massive, broad-shouldered man, stepped in front of Julian, holding up a thick manila folder. Even through the glass, I could see the cold, unbothered expression on the contractor's face as he handed Julian the immediate seizure warrant. Julian fell to his knees in the snow, clutching the folder as the tow truck operator hooked the thick steel chains to the undercarriage of the $500,000 Lamborghini. Back inside the dining room, the humiliation was absolute. Julian's parents were frantically packing their coats, refusing to look at my parents as they practically sprinted for the back door to escape the impending media circus. Chloe collapsed into a chair, openly weeping, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly rivers. She kept staring at the massive diamond ring on her finger as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous spider. My father was gripping the back of a chair, breathing heavily, staring blankly at the floor. The realization that his law firm's reputation was now permanently tied to a federal fraud investigation was washing over him, effectively ending his career. And then there was the photographer. The nervous man my mother had hired to capture the perfect aristocratic Christmas memory. He had backed himself into the corner of the room, his expensive camera still raised. Click, click, click. He was rapidly snapping photos of the entire devastating scene. Chloe sobbing at the table, my mother standing paralyzed in shock, the financial documents still glowing brightly on the television screen. And outside, the fake billionaire on his knees in the snow as his rented empire was towed away. He lowered his camera, looking absolutely terrified but completely captivated by the raw, undeniable drama. My mother didn't even have the energy to yell at him to stop. The Harrington family facade hadn't just cracked. It had been systematically, surgically, and entirely vaporized. The untouchable golden child was a broke, humiliated fiancé to a criminal. The aristocratic parents were exposed as desperate enablers about to face total social ruin. I stood there, the only calm, breathing entity in a room suffocating on its own karma. The heat of the roaring fireplace had never felt so satisfying. The silence in the dining room had completely transformed. It was no longer the oppressive, aristocratic silence of a family trying to maintain a flawless aesthetic. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a graveyard. I stood at the foot of the 20-foot mahogany table, my fingertips resting lightly against the cool, polished titanium of my briefcase. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the chaotic energy of the room wash over me without letting a single drop of it penetrate my armor. For 28 years, the air in this house had been toxic to my lungs. It had been filled with microaggressions, whispered insults, and the unspoken, universal family agreement that my sole purpose was to be the foundation upon which they built their golden delusions. But tonight, the air tasted entirely different. It tasted like absolute, undeniable victory. I looked around the room,
taking a mental photograph that was far more satisfying than anything the hired photographer could have ever captured. The magnificent 24-karat gold-rimmed china was pushed aside, forgotten. The crystal goblet Julian had been drinking from was knocked over, a dark stain of expensive scotch rapidly spreading across the pristine, hand-embroidered Italian lace tablecloth. The roaring fire in the colossal stone hearth, which had previously cast a warm, golden glow of wealth across the room, now seemed to highlight the deep, haggard lines of terror on my parents' faces. My father was slumped against the wall, clutching his chest, staring blankly at the floor as the reality of his impending public and professional ruin settled into his bones. My mother, Evelyn, the great, untouchable matriarch of the Connecticut Country Club elite, was trembling violently. Her bespoke emerald green silk gown suddenly looked less like a symbol of high society and more like a tragic, ill-fitting costume on a woman who had just lost her entire identity. And then there was Chloe, the golden child. She was still sitting in her plush velvet chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with ugly, dramatic sobs. She wasn't crying because she felt betrayed by Julian's lies. She was crying because she realized she was going to have to cancel her $1 million wedding, return her stolen diamond ring, and face the absolute humiliation of her wealthy friends discovering she was engaged to a penniless federal criminal. I picked up my encrypted laptop and slipped it effortlessly into the secure, custom-molded interior of my titanium briefcase. The metallic click of the dual-reinforced latches snapping shut echoed through the cavernous room like the final bang of a judge's gavel. "Elena." The voice was weak, trembling, and barely recognizable. I paused, my hand hovering over the handle of the briefcase. I slowly turned my head. It was my mother. She had taken a hesitant, shaking step toward me. The venom and arrogance were completely gone from her icy blue eyes, replaced by a hollow, desperate pleading. She reached a trembling, perfectly manicured hand out toward me, as if trying to bridge the massive, insurmountable chasm she had spent a lifetime digging between us. "Elena, please," she whispered, a genuine tear finally breaking free and rolling down her powdered cheek. You can't just leave us like this. What are we going to do? What am I going to tell people? We are your family. Please, help us." I looked at her outstretched hand. I looked at the woman who, less than an hour ago, had looked me dead in the eye and told me I was too aesthetically displeasing to warrant a plate at her dinner table. The little girl inside of me, the one who used to cry in her small, freezing back bedroom, wondering why she wasn't good enough to be loved, waited for a pang of guilt. She waited for the familiar, deeply ingrained instinct to rush forward, sacrifice my own well-being, and clean up their mess. But that little girl was gone. And in her place stood the senior managing partner of Vanguard Financial Intelligence, a woman who dealt in facts, ledgers, and absolute accountability. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply looked at her with a profound, impenetrable apathy. Because the opposite of love isn't hate, Evelyn. It's indifference. "You are going to do exactly what you told me to do, Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm, smooth, and devoid of any emotional attachment. "You are going to stay out of sight, and you are going to handle the optics." I turned my back on her. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I didn't care. I grabbed the handle of my briefcase and began the long walk back down the length of the dining room. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pristine marble floor. Click, click, click. Every single step felt like a heavy steel chain snapping off my body. With every yard I covered, the crushing, invisible weight of their expectations, their gaslighting, and their toxic manipulation dissolved into the ether. I walked past the sobbing golden child without breaking my stride. I walked past my paralyzed, cowardly father without a second glance. I stepped out of the dining room, crossed the massive, echoing foyer, and pushed the heavy, ornate double oak doors open. The freezing, howling Connecticut blizzard rushed up to greet me, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt incredibly pure. It felt like a baptism. I stepped out onto the sweeping front portico, pulling my thick, charcoal gray wool coat tight around my shoulders. The scene unfolding in the circular, snow-covered driveway was a masterpiece of absolute, chaotic justice. The brilliant, rotating yellow strobe lights of the 3 massive flatbed tow trucks cut violently through the swirling white snow, illuminating the darkness like a warning beacon. The deafening, mechanical roar of the diesel engines and the heavy clanking of thick steel chains completely drowned out the pathetic, distant sounds of my family's panic inside the estate. Julian, the arrogant, untouchable tech billionaire who had mocked my salary just an hour prior, was currently on his hands and knees in the freezing slush. His expensive $5,000 tuxedo was soaked through with dirty snow. He was weeping hysterically, begging the massive, unbothered security contractors to stop, as the thick steel hooks were secured to the undercarriage of his beloved, heavily leased Lamborghini Aventador. As I walked down the sweeping stone steps, my boots crunching satisfyingly into the fresh snow, the lead contractor, a towering man named Marcus, whom I had personally hired for this exact operation, caught sight of me. He stepped away from the weeping fraud in the snow, stood up perfectly straight, and offered me a sharp, respectful nod. "Everything is secured, boss," Marcus called out over the roar of the tow trucks, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute, unquestionable respect. "The physical assets are locked in for transport to the holding facility, and the federal agents just confirmed they have breached his corporate office downtown. The sweep is complete." Julian's head snapped up at the word boss. His eyes, red and swollen from crying, locked onto me. The sheer, devastating realization of who I truly was, and the absolute, godlike power I held over his entire existence, finally broke whatever was left of his mind. He opened his mouth to scream at me, to beg, to say something, but the words died in his throat as the heavy hydraulic winch engaged, violently dragging his prized Lamborghini up the steep metal ramp of the flatbed. I didn't even acknowledge his existence. I simply offered Marcus a professional nod in return. "Good work, Marcus. Take it all," I said, my voice slicing through the cold air. I turned and walked toward my car. It wasn't just a modest Audi. It was a heavily armored, custom-tuned S8 that I had purchased in cash 2 years ago, kept deliberately understated to avoid the very toxic financial parasitism I had just permanently severed. I pulled the heavy door open, slid into the plush, heated leather driver's seat, and tossed the titanium briefcase onto the passenger side. I hit the ignition, and the massive twin-turbo V8 engine roared to life with a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the steering wheel and straight into my chest. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pressed the accelerator. The heavy tires gripped the snow perfectly as I began to roll down the long, winding driveway. I didn't speed away. I took my time. I wanted to feel every single second of this departure. As I approached the massive wrought iron gates at the end of the property, I looked up into the rearview mirror. Through the sweeping windshield wipers and the thick, falling snow, the grand Harrington estate looked incredibly small. I watched the flashing yellow lights of the tow truck slowly pulling away, carrying the physical remnants of Julian's fraudulent empire with them. I could faintly see the dark silhouette of my mother standing in the doorway, watching her perfect, aristocratic world violently crumble into the snow. I kept watching the mirror until the estate, the flashing lights, and the ghosts of my traumatic past completely vanished into the whiteout of the blizzard. They were gone. Completely, permanently, and irrevocably gone. I turned my eyes back to the dark, open road ahead of me. I reached over, turning up the climate control, letting the warm air wash over my face. I gripped the leather steering wheel, a slow, genuine, and beautifully unburdened smile spreading across my lips. I was 28 years old. I was the senior managing partner of a multi-million-dollar intelligence firm. I had a bank account that could buy their pathetic country club 3 times over. A life built entirely on my own blood, sweat, and undeniable brilliance. And a future that was completely mine to command. The family scapegoat had just burned the slaughterhouse to the ground. And as I drove into the night, feeling the absolute, intoxicating breeze of total freedom, I had never felt more alive. The morning sun broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse, casting long, sharp prisms of golden light across the imported Brazilian hardwood floors. There was no blizzard here. The sky above the city was a brilliant, piercing, unclouded blue, reflecting perfectly off the calm, dark waters of the harbor below. I stood in my massive open-concept kitchen, wrapped in a plush, heavy silk robe, pouring a steaming cup of dark roast coffee from the French press. The apartment was profoundly, beautifully silent. There were no shrill voices demanding my attention. There were no heavy, passive-aggressive sighs echoing from the hallway. There was no suffocating tension hanging in the air, waiting to suffocate me the moment I stepped out of line. There was only the soft hum of the city far below and the undeniable, intoxicating scent of total peace. I walked over to the sprawling white marble island and picked up my personal cell phone. I tapped the screen, illuminating the notifications. The top alert was a breaking news headline from a major financial network. Tech CEO Julian Sterling arrested in multi-million-dollar federal fraud sweep. Assets seized amidst Ponzi allegations. I read the headline slowly, taking a sip of my coffee. The hot, rich liquid warmed my chest. I swiped the notification away. I didn't need to read the article. I had written the very ledger the FBI was currently using to dismantle his life. My phone was otherwise empty. There were no frantic text messages from my mother begging for money to hire a crisis PR firm. There were no demanding voicemails from my father commanding me to fix the mess. There were no manipulative, tear-stained paragraphs from Chloe blaming me for her ruined wedding. My phone was silent because, before I had even reached the city limits last night, I had systematically blocked every single phone number, email address, and social media account associated with the Harrington family. I had severed the corrupted branches of my family tree at the root, cauterized the wound, and walked away. I set the mug down and walked out onto my private wraparound balcony. The crisp winter air bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. I leaned against the thick glass railing, looking out over the sprawling, infinite expanse of the city skyline. A city where I was not a scapegoat, not an afterthought, and not a tragedy. I was a titan. And right now, I need you to listen to me. I need you to stop whatever you are doing. Look at the screen and listen to the absolute truth. If you are watching this video and you felt your chest tighten when my mother told me there was no plate for me at the table, if you felt a familiar, sickening drop in your stomach when my family prioritized a fake, arrogant billionaire over their own flesh and blood, it is because you have lived it. You know the dark, exhausting, psychological war zone of being the family scapegoat. For years, you have been told that you are the problem. You have been gaslit into believing that your reactions to their relentless emotional abuse are the actual toxic elements in the household. You have watched a golden child be rewarded for breathing, while you were actively punished for achieving greatness. You have been expected to be the reliable mule, carrying the heavy, unspoken burdens of your family's dysfunction, while simultaneously being treated as entirely invisible. And every time you tried to stand up for yourself, every time you tried to assert a single boundary, they used the ultimate weapon against you. They weaponized society's favorite, most destructive lie. But they are your family. Society demands that we offer an infinite reserve of forgiveness to the people who share our DNA. We are told to keep showing up to holiday dinners, to keep funding their bad decisions, to keep turning the other cheek while they continuously slap us across the face. We are conditioned to believe that severing ties with our parents or siblings is the ultimate, unforgivable sin. But I am here to tell you, with the absolute authority of someone who just burned a toxic empire to the ground, blood does not equal a blank check. DNA is a biological accident. It is not a lifelong, binding contract that entitles anyone to your financial resources, your mental health, or your fundamental human dignity. You do not owe your abusers your presence simply because they happen to be in the delivery room when you were born. My parents wanted a prop. They wanted a silent, obedient bank account who would fund their aristocratic delusions without ever demanding a seat at the table. They thought my kindness was a weakness. They thought my silence was submission. They vastly, catastrophically underestimated the fact that while they were busy curating their fake image for the country club, I was quietly, ruthlessly building an empire of my own. The greatest threat to a toxic family structure is a fully independent, financially secure, and emotionally awakened scapegoat. They rely on your fear. They rely on your ingrained guilt. They need you to believe that you cannot survive without their scraps of conditional love. Because the moment you realize your own immense power, their entire illusion violently collapses. Walking away from toxic people is not an act of cruelty. It is not an act of vengeance. It is the ultimate, non-negotiable act of self-preservation. It is looking the people who broke you directly in the eye and finally saying, "My peace is vastly more expensive than anything you can afford." You cannot heal in the exact same environments that made you sick. You cannot save people who are perfectly content watching you drown as long as it keeps their heads above water. If they refuse to set a plate for you at their table, you do not sit in the kitchen and eat their scraps. You stand up, you walk out the front door, and you buy the entire damn restaurant. My revenge wasn't just exposing Julian's fraud or towing his leased cars away in the snow. My ultimate revenge was my utter, impenetrable indifference. It was looking at my mother's terrified, pleading face and feeling absolutely nothing. It was driving away into the night, knowing that my future was completely, unequivocally mine, and that they would never, ever have access to my light again. You have that exact same power inside of you right now. You hold the keys. You control the narrative. The moment you decide to stop participating in their theater of abuse is the moment you win. I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to visualize the heavy oak doors of your own traumatic past. And I want you to realize that you have the strength to turn around and walk out into the cold, clean air of your own absolute freedom. We are not victims here. We are the survivors who decided to become the CEOs of our own destinies. If this story resonated with the deepest parts of your soul today, I need to hear from you. Go down into the comments section right now. I want you to share your own stories of resilience. Have you ever had to draw a permanent line in the sand with a toxic parent? Have you ever had to quietly pack your bags, cut off the financial supply, and walk away to protect your own sanity? How did you find the strength to choose yourself? Write your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, there is someone sitting in the dark right now, feeling completely alone, who needs to read your exact words to find the courage to finally push their chair back from a table where they are not respected. Hit that like button to show the algorithm that stories of fierce, unapologetic independence matter. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. We are not just telling stories here. We are building a massive, unstoppable community of self-made, empowered individuals who refuse to be manipulated. We are building a fortress for those who know that true loyalty is earned, respect is mandatory, and the ultimate justice is living an incredibly successful, beautiful life far beyond the reach of those who tried to destroy us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for walking through the blizzard with me. Never apologize for protecting your peace. Never fund another person's toxic delusion. And always remember your absolute, undeniable worth. Stay strong, stay brilliant, and I will see you in the next video.